Okay, thank you so much. Welcome. We're calling this meeting to order at 10:11 a.m. Can you please call the roll?
Yes. Director Lopez,
Present.
Director Giallo, Director Barrientos, Director Nygaard,
Present.
Chair Trigger.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. Is there any public comment in the room? Not seeing any. Is there any public comment online? This is on matters not on the agenda.
There are currently no hands raised at this time.
Thank you. Moving on to item 3, approval of the minutes from October 17, 2026. I will entertain any motions.
Motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Thank you. Discussion. Hearing none. Let's call the roll on that.
Yes. Director Lopez,
Yep.
Director Giallo, Director Barrientos, Director Nygaard,
Yes.
Chair Trigger.
Aye.
Minutes are approved.
Great. Moving on to item 4, which is a regulatory update. We will first hear from staff.
Do I take the stand or do
You're welcome to just stay seated because the audio is captured everywhere, so you're all good.
Thank you for that clarification. Good morning, directors, staff and others on the line. My name is John Newton. I'm the Director of Regulatory Affairs within AVA's public policy team. I, with my colleague Michael Quiroz, who's on the Zoom call, will be presenting on a few items: resource adequacy, hourly transactability, power charge indifference adjustment transparency, and the evolving large load regulatory landscape in California. We're presenting this information to provide some context for some of the legislative matters that you'll hear about shortly from AVA's public policy legislative team, seated on my left. If we turn to the next slide, there are, as I mentioned, these 3 topics that we will address, and this is meant to be a fairly focused and narrow presentation on key points. The takeaways, as you see here, regarding resource adequacy, that again our colleague Michael Quiroz will be presenting on in a moment, is really focused on an incremental enhancement to the resource adequacy program managed and run by the California Public Utilities Commission. We have been advocating for this in the regulatory space for some time. AVA specifically was, I think, a leader over several years in encouraging the CPUC's RA program to evolve its overall program towards slice of day. We'll hear more about that in a minute. And one of the pieces that we've been looking for some time is to translate in the CPUC's RA program a bit of more incremental enhancements as they've made this major transition over the last few years. You'll hear again in the legislative context that we are continuing to advocate in multiple forums for this. The next item is on the power charge indifference adjustment. This is more of an historical item at this point as it relates to the discussion for today. We are looking for improved transparency in how the CPUC establishes part of power charge indifference adjustment. And again, something that is in the regulatory realm leading into a legislative context and discussions and advocacy there. And then finally, a very brief bit of information about the regulatory activities related to large loads. There was already an excellent presentation at the February 18 Advisory Committee and board meeting from our Director of Strategic Loads, Ariel Romero-Cox. So we're not going to be repeating that information, but this is more focused on the regulatory matters specifically. With that, I'll turn it to the next slide and my colleague.
Thanks, John. My camera is not cooperating. Can you folks hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So, like John mentioned, first we're going to chat about resource adequacy and transactability. Let's start with a definition. What is resource adequacy? Having adequate resources is meant to ensure that you have enough energy generation capacity to maintain a balance of supply and demand across an electric system at any given moment. Why do you want to do that? to prevent outages and equipment damages. The CPUC has a regulatory program, appropriately named Resource Adequacy, to achieve that. There are two overarching goals of the CPUC's RA program. First is to make sure that load-serving entities like AVA have enough capacity under contract in the near term to reliably serve customer demand. Second is to incentivize the siting, construction, and retainment of resources needed for future grid reliability. So how does that work in practice? Load-serving entities, like AVA, have to show that they've procured enough generation capacity to meet not only expected energy demands from customers, but also additional capacity in reserve for grid stress events. This is achieved through showings or compliance filings. Load-serving entities will, once yearly and 12 times each month within a year, show the CPUC, hey, look, here's our contract information. Here's how much capacity we have from wind, solar, gas, etc. We are prepared to meet forecasted peak customer energy demands. Next slide. Prior to 2025, load-serving entities were required to procure capacity to cover a single peak demand hour each month. So if our forecasts pointed towards March 6th at 10 a.m. as being the peak demand hour for that month, LSCs would have to show the CPUC, hey, look, I've procured enough capacity to cover the expected peak demand conditions on March 6th at 10 a.m. Slice of day regulations, which were first implemented last year, changed that framework. Now, LSCs have to look at not just one peak hour each month, but the 24 hours in the peak day of each month. So instead of March 6th at 10 a.m., LSCs have to show they have enough capacity to cover 1 a.m. to 11 p.m. and all of the intervening hours. The idea here being that you want to make sure that with variable resources like solar that may not be available through the entirety of a 24-hour period, your portfolio in sum can cover peak demand through the course of an entire day. There's a wrinkle here. Under existing rules, load-serving entities are restricted in how they can transact or purchase or sell capacity to ensure that they are compliant under slice of day. Adjustments to an LLC's portfolio, i.e. transacting capacity, are limited to the entire month, even though obligations are unique to each hour. So if Ava is looking at our portfolio and we realize March 6th at 1 p.m., we have a shortfall, we can't just go buy capacity for March 6th at 1 p.m. The way that we buy capacity is for the entirety of March. So there's a mismatch here between how you can transact and what the compliance obligation is. That mismatch means LSCs often purchase more resource adequacy capacity than is needed to meet obligations, which drives up prices. CCAs have supported transactability as a policy proposal to address that mismatch. Transactability would allow CCAs and other load-serving entities to trade obligations at the hourly level in order to reduce costs to consumers. The idea here is that if resource adequacy capacity requirements are set on an hourly basis, the capacity products that we buy and sell should also be available on an hourly basis, or there should be another mechanism to achieve that. Parties are currently evaluating transactability in the current resource adequacy proceeding at the Public Utilities Commission, and there is a piece of legislation that my colleagues will discuss further that would also address transactability.
We can proceed. Oh, we're good. Thank you. So, thank you, Michael. This is the power charge and difference adjustment transparency point. Very briefly, breathtakingly briefly, the power charge and difference adjustment is the difference between the utility's portfolio costs and current market valuation for those resources. Simple concept. The evaluation of what the value is, the market value, or what the current transactions are gathered through information collected from parties, entities that are transacting for resource adequacy or renewable portfolio standard renewable energy credits or other types of energy. Information is gathered, and then it is used by the CPUC to develop a forecast of the value of these things. That forecast is then adjusted later in the course of the year to establish what the actual transactions have been. So what the market actually was. This creates a difference between a forecasted and then a trued up market price benchmark for a variety of things that contribute towards the overall PCIA adjustment or PCIA that is then recovered by load serving entities, CCA customers, utility customers, everybody subject to this. As y'all have heard, the CPUC initiated a proceeding early last year, February, to revise certain elements of the power charge and difference adjustment on a very accelerated timeline. They identified, the CPUC Energy Division staff produced a report identifying a range of what they perceived as flaws in how the PCIA is determined. They made adjustments to the methodology to determine what the market price benchmarks, the market value of these things are specific to resource adequacy. And then within 6 months, issued a final decision on that report and adjusting the resource adequacy portion of the PCIA market price benchmarks. That's the history. And we continue to feel that there was insufficient information shared by the CPC about how they determined that there was a flaw in the prior methodology. And we have raised this in the proceeding. We have also appealed effectively. We've brought a petition for, we've appealed, the short version is we've appealed that final decision on a variety of grounds, one of which is insufficient transparency about how they came to their determination. That's the history of the resource adequacy market price benchmark in the PCIA track 1. That's history at this point, though. We continue to advocate for improved transparency so that we can evaluate the basis for these changes. And that's all I'm going to say about PCIA. But that's the context here. Thank you. Turning to the large loads topic. The very excellent presentation back in February from our Director of Strategic Loads provided a great range of information about commercial strategy and thinking, the context kind of out in the market, what customers are doing. Here, just focused on the regulatory process and what's happening. The main forum right now is at the CPUC with the electric rule application with PG&E. This was initially filed back in November of 2024. PG&E's Rule 30 proposal is to standardize the interconnection process for retail, non-wholesale, end-use consumption of energy at the transmission voltage levels. The core information to understand with regard to the Rule 30 process is both the utility and as a load serving entity, we have an obligation to serve. As the default load serving entity for new loads in our member communities, if this load comes, we must serve it. It's a matter of information awareness on the initial front, and then subject to these customers declining our service and selecting another provider, it is our obligation to serve. The scale of the new large loads present a range of questions relating to load forecasting, reliability, and energy system planning, as well as customer costs. However, in California, the regulatory framework has not quite advanced to addressing all of those topics. The first one that we're dealing with right now is merely interconnecting, letting these, or how do these loads connect to the grid. and then what load serving entity is the default. That is the regulatory process right now. There is an interim Rule 30, Electric Rule 30, that has been adopted pending resolution or final resolution of a more complete revised Rule 30 interconnection process. There are other regulatory activities that are coming but have not yet started. As you see here on the right, we have a graph showing a range of the load forecasts by the California Energy Commission in the Integrated Energy Policy Report process, the IPER. This is specific to data centers, and I did not include the specific amounts per year, but for reference, in the mid-2030s, we're expecting that based on the California Energy Commission's load forecasting process, that large loads, many of which will be data centers, could be approximately 10% of AVA's load. That concludes my presentation.
If I could just chime in at one point, this is a great sort of context setter intro for the next item, which is on our legislative session. Obviously, what John has highlighted in this presentation, this brief presentation, is the two prior slides are on specific bills that Sam's going to talk about a little bit more detail. The first Cal CCA sponsored bills that we've done. So that's why it's a little bit of a big deal, and why this is a little bit of an introductory companion piece to this, because the PCIA and the RA transactability are two pretty meaty topics. And because we're sponsoring those bills, we want to give a little bit more context going into that. And specifically on the regulatory front, since these are very active items from a regulatory proceeding perspective. So you may have a lot of questions, and obviously we can open up for discussion now, but also we may answer some of those questions in the next items. Just want to flag that.
Thank you so much for the flag and to staff for the presentation. Are there any questions at this point in time from members? I have maybe I have two. One of them is just for both of them are for clarification. The you on the power charge indifference adjustment. Did I understand that as we are preparing for future tracks of that hearing, we have also filed for rehearing
Yes. On the first,
on the first?
so there are several tracks of the PCI proceeding. We did request rehearing on the first track, which produced the final decision on the resource adequacy market price benchmarks. That was denied. We've appealed on the first track.
Okay.
And the second track is just active.
And the appeal right now, that is an appeal to the full board.
To the California courts. So we've gone beyond the agency.
Okay, yes, so there's a court action. Okay.
Yes.
And what is the timeline of that?
We're waiting on the court to respond.
Thank you. And on the second piece, I just wanted to make sure everyone here was just had the full understanding. You made the distinction between retail load interconnection and not wholesale. Could you maybe expand on the distinction?
Certainly. In a nutshell, it's that the energy service obtained is for their own consumption. That is retail consumption as opposed to wholesale with a, say, an intermediary that they would resell to downstream.
Are there any public comments online?
Yes,
We
Jim
don't have
Lutz.
any in the room.
Yes. Jim Lutz, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Jim Lutz. I'm on the CAC, but I'm speaking for myself. And it sounds like that some of these large loads would connect, from what you were saying, at transmission voltage levels. And so, but then everybody is asked to pay for that extra. Well, I guess that any addition to transmission that's caused by these large loads, any transmission additions or modifications that need to be need to be made, I would ask Ava um, to urge to push that those not be passed on to all other customers. Right now, as a residential customer, 2/3 of my bill is transmission and distribution, which Ava has nothing to do with. But I can see these large loads increasing the transmission portion, because they'll need extra transmission. And I would urge Ava's board members to strongly push that those costs be limited to the large loads that are requiring the extra transmission, and those transmission costs do not be distributed across to other customers. Thanks.
Are there any other hands?
There are no other hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. Bringing it back for discussion and also being mindful of our admonition or guidance that some questions may be answered in the next presentation. But are there any comments in the room at this time? Are there comments online? Okay, seeing no hands. Let's move on to the next item.
I just wanted to note on timing, we've got an hour left for the meeting. We should move quickly.
You got it.
Both of these items are pretty meaty, so let's just try to get
Great. Perfect. Thank you, Howard, Director Jagoob, and the rest of the MRL. My name is Sam Sadel, and I lead our legislative work here. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Kendall and Dominic, who are the three of us who will be presenting on the current state of the California legislature and how we are engaging in that conversation. Go to the next slide. So this is the legislative schedule. We've passed bill introduction deadline and generally, I should say, know what the conversation is going to be focused on this year. Key dates to be sure to note are the end of May deadline for bills to pass their first house, the June 15 deadline for the budget, August deadline for the bills to pass the second house, and then of course the end of September deadline for the governor's veto or signature. Note here, this is a little earlier than last year because it is an election year. So they try to get out a little quicker and get out onto the campaign trail. One thing that we did not include in here is the budget trailer bills. They can happen anytime between June 15 and the end of August. So we'll sort of see where they fall in that process. All right, next slide. Perfect. So today we're going to focus primarily on the 37 bills that we're digging into, but I wanted to give you a quick look at the full 1,800 bills in the legislature this year. I should note, this is the lowest number in the past 20 years. But roughly 600 of those 1,800 are what we call spot or intent of legislature bills. What that means is there's no yet substantive bill text so that those can change dramatically over the course of the legislative session. Now, when we decide which of bills within the 1,800 to look at, we settled on 83, although that number will change. And these are bills that touch on upon our JPA. So our JPA sets out the space in which we operate. There are roughly 83 bills that are touched on that space. So we keep an eye on all of those 83 bills. If you could slip to the next slide for me. We're not going to dig into all of them, obviously. There's a lot of them. The next slide, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Stop. Okay, so the reason that I put this list in here for board members, please feel free to treat this as a database. So these are all hyperlinked. So if anybody raises these bill issues, you can now immediately find them in your PDF, click on the hyperlink, it'll take you directly to the bill text. So this is more meant as a reference document at this point for your use, rather than we're not going to get into all of them today. Next slide, please. Okay, so now what we're actually going to focus on are the 37 bills that directly relate to our legislative program around affordability, protecting community choice, decarbonization, and bill transparency. Our goal here today isn't to dig too deeply into each of these bills, but rather to brief you on what the conversation looks like in Sacramento around each of these bills. And I say that because there's always multiple approaches to address a given conversation or problem that the legislature is seeing. And so what you'll see is we've grouped them in ways where bills are talking to one another and taking different approaches. Our plan from here is to take your thoughts, the board, cross-functional partners that we work with, our CCA colleagues, and spend the next 4 weeks digging deeply into these bills to come back to you all in April with bill recommendations and proposed positions for the agency to take. Notably, with 2 exceptions, and that is the RA transactability bill as well as the CIA, we are going to be moving those forward for approval of the board in March, so that we can get moving quicker on doing our advocacy work in favor of those bills, should you all agree. Great. Next slide. So I wanted to start, before we jump too far into PCIA and RA, with our rate affordability. I mean, this obviously is a huge question and a huge push from not just AVA customers, but around the state. As we all know, California has the second highest electricity rates in the country, and legislators are paying close attention. That said, 2 things before we get into the bills. We are seeing, as Howard has told you in previous months, a considerable decrease in customer generation rates. Also, we're now in a year after the passage of SB 254 last year, which was the big affordability package from the legislature. There are still a lot of pieces coming out of that, including ongoing PUC processes and other pieces. So we're really not 100% sure what the post SB 254 world is going to look like. That said, the legislature is charging ahead with more changes, as they are wont to do. So first, I want to talk about briefly here on rate affordability as it deals with the PUC. And so this is really about, there's a few different approaches the way the legislature is talking about this. They're talking about it in a sense of how the PUC approves customer rates, and then what it must consider in that approval of customer rates. You can see here, AB 1975 is really on that input side. So what this is changing is the inputs that the PUC must consider before it approves spending. So in this case, it's infrastructure. Versus AB 2611 and SB 924, which are on the outputs. And that's saying, okay, what are the rates that the PUC can approve for ratepayers? So it's looking at the 2 sides of the coin there. Similarly, AB 2463 from Chair Petrie Norris is how much should the IOUs make when a rate is improved? That's a research study. So you can see they're taking slightly different approaches, but all looking at the pieces of what the PUC thinks about and what the rates are that it approves. So when we look at these bills, we're looking at them analyzing them from a couple of lenses: how they're applied to CCAs, what the impact is on our ratepayers and our rate setting, and our procurement autonomy. So when we analyze and look at each of these bills, that's how we think about them. Happy to dig in further, but of course, this is the general approach and the types of bills that we're looking at for the PUC process reform driven towards lower rates. So that's one conversation. As you know, on the other side of the house, which we talked about and Jim Lutz was so ably mentioned, transmission and distribution is a very significant portion of the bill. And while we're seeing generation rates decline, transmission and distribution continues to increase. And this has not escaped the attention of the legislature. And of course, our recent report from our policy team on the drivers really puts a lot of focus on transmission and distribution. And so I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Dominic to talk about what the legislature is doing on the T&D side. So Dominic?
Thanks, Sam. So as you see on the right side here, it indicates the legislature has a few bills that they're trying to address affordability by way of transmission, distribution, the physical infrastructure of the grid. Major delays in building out or improving grid infrastructure, notably transmission interconnection, is a key contributor to rising utility bill costs and also a threat to reliability. When projects don't interconnect on time to serve customers, or when the grid lacks enough transmission to deliver those electrons to customers, resulting in congestion, prices go up. So there are many reasons why those delays happen, including supply chain constraints and backlogs, lengthy permitting requirements, or slow or outdated planning processes. So these 4 bills here aim to tackle those issues, those dynamics in a number of different ways. In the interest of time, I'll touch on just 2 of them here for you all. AB 2239 is about accountability, but also getting things done more quickly in certain priority areas. It would allow for expedited energy project development and in designated areas with limited existing infrastructure, energy infrastructure. And it would also impose penalties on utilities for failing to meet energization timelines or targets. So just connecting things that are built to the grid, ready to get into service. And then I'll highlight AB 2516. This is the California Grid Manufacturing Initiative is the name of this one. It's aimed at addressing supply chain delays. So the ones I mentioned, it would allow the state to aggregate demand for critical energy components like transformers, switchboards, coordinate the procurement of those components, and incentivize in-state manufacturing on behalf of utilities. It would also require IOUs like PG&E and public utilities to buy those components procured by the state. So just a couple to highlight there.
Next slide. Thanks, Dominic. So now we get to the highlight of the day, which is of course the key bills, AB 1761 and SB 1138. These 2 bills are building on what John and his team ably spoke about, as well as, of course, the presentation around large loads that you heard in the February board meeting. Sorry, excuse me. We'll come to that in a second. I jumped ahead. So as we talk about these 2 bills here, the first one, AB 1761, this is our PCIA I cannot speak tonight, my apologies. PCIA transparency bill. This will allow, of course, for much of that data transparency that John spoke about. And this has really been key. We've been a key part of this conversation within CalCCA, helping to draft this proposal and bring it forward. We think it will have a really important value to proactively protect community choice in the state of California. And that's why we're going to be asking you at the March board meeting to approve and come out officially in favor of this bill. That will allow us to do work with our cities and counties as well as legislators more deeply and really try to move this bill along forward. I'm happy to stop for a second and talk about the bill, but I feel like it's pretty, why don't I pause and see if there are any questions at this moment? All right, hearing none, we'll continue into our second bill, which is SB 1138. This is a bill to move forward with RA transactability. As you've heard, this has been a long ongoing conversation with the change to slice of day. And so as we talk about this bill will actually allow for the trading of RA compliance products at the level that we think is needed. This will save an estimated load serving entities $180 million per year based on 2025 prices. This will be, of course, both through more efficient procurement of resource adequacy, as well as driving down prices for resource adequacy. This is a bit of a change from last year's legislative strategy. Last year, the strategy was focused on trying to slip this bill, this is a relatively short bill, into omnibus bills, into larger bills, and sort of the SB 254 style energy bills. In this case, this year, we're pushing it alone as a single bill on a single issue. That's, I think, really exciting. I think that increases our likelihood for success, either as the bill itself or through, again, getting it linked into another piece of legislation. And again, last but not least, I will note, again, we will be asking you to support both these measures at the March board. So these really build off all the great work they've done on the regulatory side. It's now time to move into the legislative side from our perspective. Director Trigger, I know you wanted to pause for questions before we dug in, given John's presentation.
Great, any questions? Okay,
All right.
I might have actually on AB 1761. Can you speak at high level how, if this were to be signed, how it may impact the ongoing case on track one?
I'm gonna actually, I can speak to, we're working to get it signed, but I'll defer to John to speak out its potential impacts.
So we would be very excited to have better transparency in this area. We would be able to evaluate, to interrogate the analysis that the commission, the CPUC, had performed with regard to the resource adequacy market price benchmarks. We would be able to, as currently drafted, be able to better analyze their proposals for changes in the future. The PCIA proceeding that is currently underway, track 2, has a, say, more narrow scope than the first track, which was oriented towards all RA market price benchmarks and had a very substantial impact across the state. This second track is anticipated to have a more narrow focus and consequently potentially a less profound impact, but later reforms that the commission might undertake, we want to understand what their thinking is so that they are better reasoned. And we would anticipate, therefore, more predictable for us.
Thank you. On SB 1138, and apologies if I missed this, what is the significance of the 25% compliance obligation max?
That was reached through consensus working within CalCCA.
Okay.
Of course.
You have quite a bit more to present, correct?
Yes, I just want to make sure that we,
So
yeah.
I would suggest we get.
Okay, you got it.
About half the presentation,
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Perfect. Well, next slide then. And with that,
Alright.
I'm going to pass it over to Kendall to talk about data centers.
Yes, and for the sake of everyone's time, I'll try to keep this brief as well. Data centers. We all know that proposed across the nation as well as California, we're seeing a rapid increase in data center development, as well as California's electric system undergoes a major transition with all of electrification of transportation, building decarbonization, and the retirement of fossil fuel generation, all while affordability concerns are increasing. Policymakers and stakeholders are asking themselves the same question. How might we accommodate these large oncoming loads without shifting those costs onto existing ratepayers or creating reliability risk for the grid? The bills here represent a spectrum of legislative approaches aimed to address that challenge. These bills attempt to answer key questions such as how we might dictate the threshold of these loads from 20 megawatts to 75, or even define what a data center is. How do we ensure these costs are insulated from other customers while also preserving our statewide climate goals? Policymakers and stakeholders alike have yet to identify the silver bullet, or at least agree on one. This is still a rapidly evolving conversation, and we do expect that both the legislature as well as the PUC will continue refining how California approaches large load growth over the next several years. Across these proposals, key themes that AVA are paying close attention to begin with 1, preventing cost shifts to existing ratepayers. So we really see this heavily addressed in both AB 2383 as well as SB 886. Both of these bills order the commission and or order the development of a special rate tariff for these large load customers at different thresholds of megawatts, again, from that 20 to 75. This would aim to insulate those costs, but 2383 takes a bit of a different approach, a bit more pro-development, being that some of the transmission costs, as we've mentioned earlier, are considered system-wide benefits and therefore equally spread among ratepayers. Whereas 886 is a bit more all-encompassing, including any and all costs for transmission upgrades would be covered by a data center or a large load customer. Our second theme, protecting grid reliability, which also includes California climate policy goals, as well as load-serving entities from stranded procurement risks. So we've seen this heavily addressed in Rule 30 negotiations, and we'll continue to address that in legislation. But specifically, we also see 887, also introduced by Senator Padilla, which removes the CEQA exemption for data centers and also includes provisions intended to prevent increased fossil fuel consumption in the state, requiring significant energy storage capacity relative to the facility's peak demand. This bill also addresses generation and procurement costs incurred, a key issue for CCAs as this relates to our forward-looking procurement obligations, such as resource adequacy. Our third key theme here is going to be improving transparency around large load development. So we see this as demonstrated in 1577 or the latter portions of SB 978, which are both trying to improve the state's visibility into where these new large loads are being proposed, how quickly they may come online, and how they could affect the electric grid as well as our policy goals. Our fourth and final framework, or key theme, I should say, is ensuring that these new frameworks preserve CCA participation and customer choice. So as we see this concern crop up several times, typically within our separate bills here, SB 978, 886, as well as 2383, we see the need to create a special tariff for these large loads. We want to ensure that CCA autonomy, or not autonomy, I should say, autonomy as well as our obligation to serve and as a default generation provider is also maintained with these legislations. So working with our key stakeholders and policymakers to ensure that that is preserved. And again, if there are any further questions on any specific bills here, feel free to address or ask me afterwards, but I want to make sure we got through that swiftly. All righty.
Next slide, please.
Wonderful. So another angle we see on these issues, we see obviously accelerated decarbonization is a huge goal for AVA as an agency. And specifically supporting industrial large load decarbonization. This comes from the industrial sector taking up a large portion of California's fossil fuel consumption. And so we see two bills here, SB 943 and 1163. Again, coming at this issue from two different perspectives. SB 943 aims to reduce electricity costs by also reducing the ratio of non-bypassable charges, PCIA, wildfire fund spending, public purpose fund spending, that is a non-bypassable volumetric charge on every single ratepayer's bill. They aim to actually reduce those ratios and adjust the transmission access charges in order to signal to industrial customers to shift as they electrify their loads and shift away from fossil fuels. On the other side, we see SB 1168 by McNerney. This bill actually, instead of decreasing electricity costs, rather it tacks on a surcharge onto any and all natural gas consumption, specifically by data centers. So again, coming at for this from a different side, which is rather than increasing electricity, we increase the cost of fossil fuel consumption. This bill, again, if we want to electrify the industrial industry, price signals do need to better reflect the actual cost of serving these loads, but this is again an ongoing policy debate with a lot of tension in Sacramento. And then with that, if we have no questions on those two, I'll pass over to Dominic.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, back one more. Sorry, thank you. So I'll touch on some of the large load bills that deal with decarbonization, particularly on our clean generation resources within California. So these three here are some that aim to expand California's fleet of utility scale generation resources. I'll just highlight two real quickly for you all. AB 1156 would aim to make it easier to site solar and storage projects on water constrained agricultural land by adjusting an existing solar use easement statute. The intent here is to help the state meet its clean energy goals while giving farmers an opportunity to temporarily convert unproductive farmland, especially as the state faces increasing water shortages. And then SB 1295, again, a different approach. This is more by requiring the state to consider mandatory procurement of certain resources. This one specifically for energy storage. That would be an additional 40 gigawatts of energy storage by 2040, and then allocate a share of that procurement target to the various LSCs within California to meet that goal. So we'll continue on. So now on the local development side, so I talked about in the previous slide about large scale generation, but what about resources cited at the customer side of the meter? We have a few bills here that deal with distributed energy resources, specifically through the lens of making it easier for folks to adopt certain electric appliances. And one that's also along with these other bills, one that's a budget bill that would shift around some existing funding to a state program that pays customers for reducing their energy consumption and feeding some energy back to the grid in strained conditions. So at the top here, AB 2612, SB 868, two related bills. SB 868 would exempt plug-in or balcony solar systems that meet certain requirements from all interconnection requirements with utilities with the state. While AB 2612 slightly more cautious approach, but it would require the State Building Standards Commission to adopt mandatory standards for electrical circuits to enable those plug-in solar systems in the next code cycle. SB 222, this is a bill from Senator Wiener, deals with electric heat pump and water heaters and HVAC systems specifically, by requiring local governments to streamline permitting for installing these systems and capping the fees on those permits. Note that this bill is substantially similar from a bill last year from Senator Wiener. That was SB 282, which Ava did support, but that bill did not move forward last year. So it's been sort of substituted into new form for this year. And then the last thing I'll touch on just on this budget bill here, again, it would reallocate some funding, or 20 million in funds that were unused for the Distributed Energy Backup Assets Program to this DSGS program. That's the Demand Side Grid Support Program, which, as I mentioned, pays customers to who have batteries installed on their side of the meter to adjust their demand and feed some of the energy back to the grid, again, as a way to increase our capacity during emergency conditions. So we'll go to transportation electrification with Sam.
Many thanks, Kendall and Dominic, for walking us through those. Lastly, on the local development side, we noticed a few bills dealing with transportation electrification. I think you've got two bit focused primarily on e-bikes and electric vehicles. On the e-bike side, again, two different approaches to addressing the same challenge. The challenge here is that there's I think a sense from some community members that there's too many e-bikes, or at least that are being used in a way that they aren't particularly pleased with. And so two different approaches. One from Assemblymember Bauer Cahan, which is, I'd say, the more far-reaching approach, which would require class 2 and 3 e-bikes to be registered with the DMV and plated similar to a car. That proposal is, as I said, the more impactful one. I should note that roughly 60% of AVA sales would be of the AVA bike electric program sales would be covered under this bill. 60% are class 2 or 3 vehicles, e-bikes. So, as I said, a more sort of aggressive approach. And on the other side of this, you've got SB 1167. This would instead ban the advertising of vehicles that do not fit into the current e-bike regulations, class 1, 2, or 3, from being advertised as e-bikes. So that's more, I would say, more of a light touch approach that would make sure that consumers were aware, hey, this vehicle requires a registration with the DMV, or this one doesn't. Slightly different approaches there. On the electric vehicle side, we've got two bills, one SB 1215. This would require IOUs to triple their investment into level 1 and 2 charging in multifamily housing. Again, the sort of more aggressive approach, and the slightly more forward-looking approach, less aggressive, is SB 1282, which would require the CEC to study and then adopt vehicle-to-grid technology regulations. So, two different approaches to a similar issue here. Next slide. I'm going to quickly take us home here. We have two bills that are dealing with smart meter technology and dynamic rates. AB 710, which from Assemblymember Irwin, which is really focused on requiring dynamic pricing, up front and smart meters to follow. I should note we do hear that will likely change to be amended into a different topic, versus AB 1787, which would require optionality for dynamic pricing once a smart meter infrastructure is in place. So again, two different approaches to a similar problem. All right, slide 18. Next one. Go back for me. This one, okay. I'm going to fly through these. SB 1178, this is an update from last year's SB 707. Again, further Brown Act modifications. We just want to keep you all aware that those continue to move forward. AB 13 and AB 2181, these are both bills that aim to make the membership of the PUC more diverse geographically, urban and rural. And then on SB 329, which is the 327, excuse me, which is the IOU spending restrictions. This should look familiar from last year. This is a rehash of SB 24 from Senator McNerney. This bill was passed and vetoed by the governor due to a drafting error. This is now the same bill without the drafting error. So we expect it should follow a similar path. Lastly, I will note there are 20 spot or intent of legislature bills dealing with energy. 20. This means things are going to change a lot. These bills are broad and they can move very quickly and be completely replaced with new language. So we're keeping an eye on all 20 of them and we'll see where they go. All right, next slide. Okay, so we've done all that. We have the full universe of bills. These are the 37 bills we're digging deeper into. Finally, we'll come back to you in April with recommendations for which bills we think that we would recommend that AVA take a formal position on. I should note, with the exception of AB 1761 and SB 1139, our PCIA and RA transactability bills, which we're going to move in March. Next slide. Okay, so we have the March Informational Board meeting. We'll present this deck or something similar to the MRL, CAC, and the board for feedback. And then in March, we'll also move those two recommendations. And then in April, we will come back to you with an annual update to our legislative program and proposed bill positions for the remainder of the bills. All right. Next slide. This is just to give you a sense of the schedule for the rest of the year. Don't need to dig into that. All right. I know that was a lot of information, but we really appreciate your patience. Pass back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Any questions in the room? I just wanted to ask, so for the April board action, if there were additional bill positions proposed, would that be for the May AVA meeting?
In addition to the ones from April?
So our plan is for the two bills that CalCCA sponsor, we're gonna bring that forward in the March meeting for approval. So this is a preview of that. We feel like, given that they're CalCCA sponsored bill, we want to have a full position established earlier. And then we will present a very similar presentation here to the March full board, which is just a preview of all the other bills. And then April will bring forward an action item with proposed positions on those bills. To the extent there are other bills that we are seeking to take a position on that could come later, you know, we could consider bringing those later, whether it's May or others. But we do not have a plan right now to defer some of the bill positions to May. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I was just looking at the line that says propose additional bill positions to MRL, XCOM, CAC, and, well, I guess it does say the board. So this is April and beyond.
Director, I mean, I think the idea is that we'll bring two positions here in March and the remainder of the positions in April. If there are other bills that change over the course of the session that we feel we'll want to bring to the board, those will come in subsequent months.
Okay.
I think the note on slide 19 that you're pointing to is in the month of April, we will propose our bill positions separate from the two that are CalCCA sponsored,
right.
To XCOM, MRL, and then to the board for approval.
Yeah, I
So
think
that's a
what I'm
reference all to
getting
the
at,
bill
okay,
today.
so
Yeah.
will we have another meeting of this committee in April prior to bringing on additional bill position recommendations?
We will bring the bill position recommendations to MRL in April.
Wait, okay.
And just to confirm, our next MRL, typically it's every other month.
Yeah.
Because of the ledge cycle, we planned for this. So the next MRL meeting is April 10th. Okay. So you will get a preview of the bill positions prior to taking it to the board for approval, with the exception of the two CalCCA sponsored ones.
Okay, thank you. I think I had one other question on this, on SB 1215. The Cortese bill. This would require IOUs to triple the number of level 2 and 3 vehicle chargers. What would be the impact, if any, on CCAs, and would this include coverage of CCA territory?
The Cortese bill, SB 1215, would only impact IOUs. And what it would do is would obligate each of the three IOUs, and in this case PG&E, to triple, essentially take the current EV charge network pilot, which has installed 4,700 ports, and triple that. So it would require them to have that install 15,000 ports over the 15,000 ports over the coming years. And so it would not apply to CCAs, it would only apply to the three IOUs, essentially a tripling of the pilot programs that each of them had already either completed or are in process of completing.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, on one more, on Cloud Act, SB 1187. Would this change the definition or propose changing it in any such way that online participation would count as participation in Cloud Act notice meetings for the purpose of quorum?
It would define the majority to mean half of the seats, not half of the directors. So if you had a board of
I see.
9, you would need to have 5 in the meeting, even if you only had, so if you had, so you had a board of 9, there were 2 vacancies. You would need to fulfill the majority of 5, the full board, not the majority of 4, the number of sitting directors.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
actually make it more.
It'd make it more
Difficult
difficult,
to
correct, because it's a majority of seats, not a majority of people.
For our purpose, we rarely, if ever, have vacancies on our board. Just to highlight that, but obviously for other agencies or city councils, can't speak to that.
And we just keep an eye on all the Brown Act changes, given our position.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's see if there are any public comments online.
There are currently no hands raised at this time.
Okay, bringing it back, any comments on this presentation? In the room? Online? We have one hand, Director Nygaard.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to actually thank the presentation. A lot to digest, a lot of really informative, material covered. I think as a resident here in the Central Valley, I think the one topic that really I have a deep concern and interest in is the growth of data centers. I do believe that in the very first part of your legislative side of the bills proposed, you touched on SB 886, and I believe the other one was AB 2383, that could be relatable to the growth of data centers. I think what I'm going to do, Sam, I'm going to actually reach out to you to get a little bit more in depth on some of these bills that do affect our Central Valley with the growth of data centers, just because this is a huge topic in a lot of our cities out here. Been approached quite a bit over the last couple months on expansion of data centers out here. Other than that, like I said, a lot of information to actually digest. And I really thank all the presenters for giving us such an in-depth, comprehensive look of what our legislative field looks like this upcoming year. Thank you again.
Thank you. Any other comments? I don't see any other hands, so I think we can bring it back to staff for the next and final information item.
Great, thanks. My name is Teresa McDermott. I'm the head of marketing at AVA, and I just want to very, very briefly set a little context for this presentation. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, James. First of all, wanted to introduce James. He's been with us for slightly less than 6 months in a brand new role here at AVA, which is kind of part and parcel with why we're bringing this item to you. James comes to us with a lot of solar industry and community engagement experience, but new to the CCA world, and has jumped in and helped us really kind of think through a first, purposeful strategy around outreach and engagement. We've obviously done a lot of outreach and engagement work since the beginning of our agency, but we've kind of just dug in and done it. And James is helping us take a step back and think thoughtfully and purposefully about how we do it and kind of helping chart this new direction. So he's going to share our kind of proposed outreach strategy with you. And just, this is a piece of our marketing strategy, not the overall marketing strategy. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to James.
Thank you, Teresa. And thank you, directors, for your time today. If you could go to the next slide. For the sake of time, I'll just kind of share an overview of what this presentation includes, which is the results of an analysis and sort of stakeholder survey that we conducted to inform this sort of establishment and refinement of the outreach strategy for AVA. And we also, if time allows, we'll get any questions and feedback from you. Sort of the structure of it is we have a brief background to kind of set the context, and then we have an in-depth analysis. For the sake of time, we won't go into the analysis today, but it's all there referenced in the slides in the packet for you to review. But we'll kind of spend the majority of the time on actually looking at the strategy update, talk about what's going to be changing going forward relative to sort of past outreach activities, and then go from there. So briefly, just to reiterate some of the context Teresa said there, when we talk about outreach and community engagement, for my position as outreach and community engagement manager, we are a team within the marketing department, and our audience is residential customers and community-based organizations. There are other teams at AVA doing outreach and engagement with other audiences, but just for the sake of setting the context for this, we just wanted to make that point clear. So if you could actually jump to slide 7 for me, please. The approach that we took to kind of doing the analysis was sort of 3 parts. The first was just learning from the experience that we've established over the last like 7-8 years of the agency. So we took a detailed look at the 3 core types of outreach activity that AVA does, which includes tabling at community events, sponsorships, which is a segment sort of across 4 different categories: event sponsorships, community sponsorships, sports sponsorships, and then like larger nonprofit sponsorships, and then also community engagement. So the first section of the analysis goes in through sort of what's working and what's not working for each of those categories. And hopefully the slides, if you want to review them, they're kind of detailed enough that you should be able to sort of get the story there. But we also sort of wanted to pull out the customer perspective. So through all these interactions, the thousands and thousands of people that we've interacted with over the years doing outreach, we've been keeping track of those engagements, and we've been sort of documenting feedback that we're hearing from people. So when we're at a table and we get the same sort of questions over and over, and we're hearing the same themes over and over, we've been keeping track of that. So thankfully, as a new employee, I was able to dig into that data and actually sort of parse out some insights. So there's a section for that as well, which is sort of based both on that data and then also the sort of testimony of our outreach coordinators who have spent a lot of time in the community. And then lastly, when I joined, I also shared out a stakeholder survey, which went out to the board of directors, as well as the CAC and the MuniPals to get more structured feedback from that stakeholder group. So together, all those things we put sort of use that as the basis of the analysis, and then sort of drew some conclusions from there. So just very briefly, sort of the strengths, I'd say, will be self-explanatory, and we'll talk more about them later, but I'll highlight some of the challenges of what we're trying to solve for with our outreach work is just sort of stagnant levels of sort of overall engagement, or excuse me, awareness. And then also a low threshold for what qualifies as engagement. So we've been tracking sort of impressions, but we haven't been tracking depth of engagement in a way that sort of is determining whether or not we're having success with the work that we're doing, right? So a lot of activity, but not necessarily seeing whether or not what we're doing is sticking. So that's also the lack of sort of metrics for success. And then just limited team capacity. We're now covering 2 counties, and we have sort of a full-time staff of 2 outreach coordinators, a couple part-time interns, and then myself in this position. But it's, especially if we want to be present in person, it's a wide range of territory to cover. And our sort of main activity up to this point has been tabling at events. And we can't be everywhere all at once, especially at Earth Day, which is the most common thing that we get. And so when we have the vast majority in terms of timeshare of our activity being tabling at events, which tend to be on evenings and weekends, we just sort of can't be everywhere at once. And so those are some of the challenges we identified, and sort of the strategy that we'll share next is sort of meant to address these things. So if you could actually jump to slide 23, you're going to see Yes, all of that. Happy to answer questions about this if you want to review it separately, but we kind of put all the detail in here. Actually, go ahead to 27, I guess it is, because there were some skipped slides, but yeah, there you go. So the starting place for me, especially in sort of managing our outreach team, is to establish like very clear goals that are connected to NAVA's mission, which is increasing access to clean energy and serving the needs of our customers. So we want to tie sort of our goal of raising awareness about AVA's existence to also raising awareness of the value that AVA provides to the customer and making that explicit. We also want to build trust in AVA as a nonprofit public agency, but also as a source of information that people can rely on their electrification journey. And last but not least, I think in addition to our goals is really to intentionally connect our customers and communities to the benefits of clean energy and electrification, and having like a benefit-centered approach to the outreach work that we're doing. Partly because this helps us raise awareness. If we lead with the benefits, that helps us sort of fuel that circle of building awareness and then trust that follows from it. So the next slide actually begins with sort of that very point and sort of summarizes our strategy going forward. The next slide, here we go. So these are kind of the 4 pillars of the outreach strategy that we wanted to define and move with going forward. So the first is to lead with affordability. We found that we attract attention and can retain people's attention when we open conversations with what do we have to offer, right? When we provide some benefit and sort of begin the conversation that way, it's the most effective way to get attention. And we can use AVA's programs, which are an incredible asset in doing that. And we can also use our bill savings assistance programs that we can refer people to, and even our sponsorships in some cases. So affordability is definitely a topic of conversation and concern across our service territory right now. So that's one reason to sort of lead with this approach, but also it's just from our experience, the most effective way to get people's attention. And then the awareness will follow from that. So the next sort of pillar of the strategy is hyperlocal presence. So this just means that we want to maintain that ongoing brand awareness throughout our service territory. And that's going to be through physical presence with our sort of in-person relationship building, but also just having our logo be visible, having our brand be visible. And that can happen through our sponsorships. It can happen through installing educational signage at community partner locations and things of that nature. So just making sure that our brand and our people are physically present throughout our service territory in every way that we can. We need to be tangible. We need to be, reachable. And the next one is community partnerships. So this is an area that if you dig into the analysis, we identified as an opportunity area for us. Just for brief context, we did 71 tabling events last year in 2025, and we had sort of 13 presentations to CBOs. So just that ratio, there's like a lot of opportunity for us to kind of do more deeper engagement with CBOs. We do have our community sponsorships program, which gives us a high volume of interaction with community-based organizations, but we also haven't necessarily gone deep with those relationships. They're often kind of we grant out the community sponsorship and then we kind of move on to the next cycle. So our intention here is to leverage the sponsorships and then also to a certain extent our grants through our local development team to deepen our relationship and engagement with community partners who can then in turn amplify our message in places that we can't always be. So there's also a trust element to this, in that our community partners know their communities and they are trusted in their communities. And so by working with and through those partners, we're going to be able to deepen the trust as well. And then the last pillar of the strategy is practical education. So we want to use demonstration projects. We want to use creative activations at tables that sort of make clean energy and electrification tangible. And wherever possible, we want to generate storytelling opportunities from that. Because if you can tell a compelling story, whether that's sort of starting with a program that AVA offers to its customers that then creates some benefit and drives people towards electrification, that compelling story is going to stick with people because people don't often remember what you say, they remember how you made them feel. So we have to have that sort of emotional component to it with our storytelling as well. So, and the best stories come from those sort of real experiences. And we think that's also just the most effective form of education as well. So this is sort of how it summarizes strategy. And the next slide does just sort of put our sort of key tactics and outreach activities in context. So again, like event tabling, for example, is an activity we have done a lot of and will continue to do a lot of. But this slide just sort of places it in the context of these sort of strategic pillars. And then also to address the issue of lack of clear metrics for success, we sort of set forward clear metrics for each of these things so we can evaluate, measure whether or not we're being effective with our time, and then sort of make adjustments over time accordingly, depending on what these metrics tell us. So I won't go through this in detail for the sake of time, but happy to sort of talk about any of these in depth offline if the opportunity arises. So next slide, please. So how is this different than what we've done before? There's two pillars I'll highlight that I've already touched on, but just our CBO strategy. In general, we want to invest more time and attention and energy into partnering with community-based organizations. And there's a couple of ways that we can do that. One is by using our community sponsorships program to kind of fit into a more intentional CBO engagement strategy, which is not just about engaging with each of those CBOs more deeply, but also potentially creating like a network effect. We've had multiple recipients of this ask us, do you all ever do convenings? Do you all ever get these sponsorship recipients together? So there is some aspect of community building that we can do through the high sort of volume of CBOs that we interact with through these sponsorships. I also think we should double down on what I'm calling strategic sponsorships, which is a bucket that includes Habitat for Humanity, which is sponsors that we've worked with where we kind of do more in-depth, it's a much lower volume, but more in-depth sponsorships that do what this next slide or what this next bullet says, which is leverage those sponsorship dollars to deliver tangible examples of clean energy with direct benefits. So those also generate a lot of great storytelling opportunities. And so where we identify opportunities for more strategic in-depth partnerships, we would like to do that as well. And then lastly, also having a focus on customers and communities with the highest energy burden who stand to benefit the most from clean energy and electrification. For a lot of reasons, that's an important thing to focus on when working with CBOs as well. And then the next slide speaks to our event strategy. So I mentioned earlier, we've measured impressions in the past. So just to be specific about what we mean there, when we're tabling at events, our team has a clicker. So when somebody comes up to the booth and sort of interacts with us, whether that's 5 minutes or 5 seconds, we sort of use that clicker to kind of keep track of how many conversations are we having. So some of the data in the analysis references impressions, and that's what it means. But that doesn't really necessarily tell us whether or not that person is going to remember us, right? Or remember what they hear from us, and whether or not that brochure we give them is useful, or whether or not it goes into the recycling. So we want to move towards measuring engagement. And so instead of sort of using that clicker, what it might look like is driving people towards calls to action when we're doing outreach, whether that's signing up for a program or even signing up for our newsletter. So then we can see, okay, is this person, opening the newsletter? Are they clicking on the links that are in the newsletter? Are they following up with us in whatever type of way? So rather than just sort of a one and done, we want to sort of go deeper. And that's what we mean by measuring engagement. And that's kind of a theme across a lot of this, is just sort of going deeper and improving the quality of interaction. So on that note, we also want to do more co-branded events. So for anybody who did not see the story about our e-bike test and ride in November, it was a huge success and a great example of sort of the cycle of using a program to sort of deepen a partnership, in this case with Bike East Bay, who we then co-hosted an event with. So rather than being, at an event where we're maybe just one booth in a sea of many, we might even be placed next to food vendors and, loud music where people can't even hear what we say. Instead, we're sort of the headliner of these events, right? So we had more than 300 people came to this event. They all knew and remember who Ava was, whether or not they had heard of us before. So we got great engagement with and through this. So we want to do more events of that kind. And in fact, we're planning on doing 2 more of these e-bike test and ride events this year, and also working with other community partners to do other types of co-branded events that we have in our plans. So to make capacity for that, we're also going to be, just to summarize, sort of being more intentional about the events that we do choose to table at. So through our research, we sort of determined there are certain kind of events that are just not conducive to good engagement. And so these are an example of some of the questions that we'll ask when kind of analyzing whether or not we should table at an event that we're going to. But we've had some events where we spend hours and hours and we don't even get one good conversation. And it's usually around these points. So related to that, we also, just looking at the time, we have one other sort of thing we wanted to highlight, which is that in the past, we've also treated event tabling and event sponsorship as one and the same, but it's more of an overlapping Venn diagram where there's going to be some events that we choose to table at, and sponsor, and then some where we might sponsor but not table that, depending on whether or not, you know, these questions are sort of answered in the right way. So just kind of being more intentional about how we approach events and sort of unbundling those things where it's appropriate. So I think the next slide is the last one, just to kind of summarize this, just to visualize it. So these aren't all precise numbers, but just to give you an idea of sort of what this means for how we're going to be spending our time. In 2025, the sort of gray blue numbers here are actually accurate. But for number 2026, this is what we're estimating for our activity. We're going to probably, based on those criteria, there's a lot of events we went to last year that we probably will not go to again this year. So we'll maybe go to fewer overall tabling events than we did previously. But with sort of that increased time and capacity, we plan on doing a lot more CBO engagement throughout our service territory. And I'll also note that we can do CBO engagement 7 days a week, right? It doesn't have to be, only on Earth Day, right? So this gives us more flexibility to make sure that we're showing up and being present in other ways throughout our service territory. So also the number for the CBO engagement is 60, because that's the number of community sponsorships we did. I'm sure we actually interfaced with more than just those community sponsorship recipients, but the idea here is that we're sort of setting an ambitious goal to go deeper with the partners that we have and also engage with more partners and sort of really double down there. And some of these other two categories of presentations to CBOs, this was one of our other findings where, again, we could be at an event where we might interact with 500 people, but if we spend 20 minutes presenting to a group of 30 people and we have their full attention for that time, we're much more likely to be able to sort of maintain that awareness and then also have a clear call to action to get them engaged, whatever the case may be. So that's it. I think I managed to do that. Yes, 3 minutes to spare. So thank you for your time and attention. Yes, if we have
3 minutes for
questions. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Any questions? Minutes. Let's actually, I want to make sure we hear if there are any members of the public that wish to speak. Please raise your hand if you're online and wish to speak on this item.
Yes, Jim Lutz, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Jim Lutz again. James, I really like the idea of going deeper with the connections and with the partners. And I also like that you lead with affordability, but I want you to be aware and the board to be aware that this is going to put pressure on the procurement and program teams within AVA, because AVA's affordability argument or claim to affordability is evaporating as more locations go to Renewable 100, which has a price premium. There'll be fewer and fewer customers that are actually getting cheaper electricity. And AVA is controlling a smaller and smaller portion of utility bills. And as you all know, people think of a utility bill, they don't think of it, they don't see just AVA's part of it. So I like what you're doing. Please keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no further hands raised at this time.
All right, with 1 minute to spare, bringing it back to the room for comments, questions. I just have you don't have to respond to this now. I'm just gonna throw out just great presentation, and I agree with Influx folks with the folks definitely that are targeted focused approach. I think the next step. So really appreciate the work that goes towards that. Curious if you may want to consider having shorts that say "Ask me about Ava" with other swag. And also, what is the strategy to reach different demographics in terms of age, family status, lifestyle, and again, we can discuss more because outside of this meeting. Let's see if there are any comments online. So please raise your hand. Yes, Director Nygaard.
I'm just going to say I am glad Ava signed up for our Earth Day event in April.
I'll be there.
So yes, we have ours at the very end of April, so not to conflict with Earth Day itself. And yes, we've always enjoyed having Ava present, so look forward to seeing them again. And on a second note, I'm just going to share that as a director of Ava and also council member, I do report out monthly, and I do mention Ava in my report outs at council meetings of either projects that are going on, programs, or different types of cost savings. We've done the e-bike shout outs a couple times over the last couple months. We did a little story time on our website of 2 or 3 of our winners locally. So yeah, I just want to say I'm a true fan of Ava, and I will always try and advocate wherever I can. So just sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. May we all have that level of engagement with our city councils to sing the praises of Ava from this, or shout them from the solid roof. Okay, with that, I think we may have lost the the CEO, but committee member and staff announcements and future agenda items, I think we sort of discussed.
We'll be bringing it back to with the recommendations to the April MRL meeting.
Thank you. Great, can I entertain I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
Oh,
We don't need a motion
we
to
don't need a
adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
Oh.
Okay, good. Thank you. Apologies, I stand corrected. We could just adjourn. We are adjourned at 11:32 a.m. Thank you.